Is the Reebok Nano X5 a must-have training shoe in 2025? Let's talk about it. So, three things to like with this shoe is number one, I really have enjoyed the reworked dual response EVA midsole. So in this shoe, you now have a dual response midsole. A lot of training shoes are going into this. You have the drop set model that has this, the Metcon model that has this, and essentially the forefoot up here is a little bit more pliable and flexible compared to the heel back here, which is a smidge more dense. Now, why I like the dual response midsole in this shoe specifically is both of the midsoles don't feel that aggressive. So for example, in the drop set 3, the midsoles are both pretty dang dense. Even though the forefoot is a little bit softer, the heel is just wicked dense and wicked stable, which is great for lifting, but it really tanks the shoe's performance for running and jumping and whatnot. The dual response midsole in this shoe, it has a little bit more give in the heel, which I personally like. So you do have a bit more of this plush feeling throughout, which I think does add a level of versatility to the Nano X5. So I do like the dual response midsole. That is a nice update in this shoe. The second thing to like with this shoe is the fit is finally a little bit wider. So this model feels most similar, in my opinion, of recent models to feeling like the Nano X2 when it comes to the forefoot width. So if you found the Nano X3 and Nano X4 to fit just way too snug and like the arch was way too aggressive, this model should be a better bet to try out. With the flex weave upper up here, you get a little bit more wiggle room and upper volume, and then also the arch just isn't as aggressive in the shoe. There is still arch, but it's not as aggressive as the Nano X4, which had a really harsh taper and a much more tapered toe box through the midfoot and up here in the forefoot. So all that to say, this model does fit wider and it has a bit more upper volume. If you love the Nano X2's fit, I think you'll resonate with the Nano X5. The third thing to like with this shoe is I see them as a really good generalist, and I don't think they've necessarily lost their edge, for example, for CrossFit. Like I have abused these on rope climbs and I have yet to have any issues. You also still have this chassis system that runs throughout, so you also get some added versatility and forgivingness when you're doing shorter runs and whatnot. And so all that to say, if you need a training shoe, in my opinion, for heavier lifting, some HIIT workouts, some cross training, and then also some CrossFit WODs, this shoe does a pretty good job. It's not so niche in any one angle to where I think it's gonna be super limiting for certain training contexts. And if you're just somebody who's like, I don't really know what to get, I've traditionally liked Reebok shoes, I just need something for a little bit of everything, that is where I think the Nano X5 is going to excel the most. But now let's talk about a couple of cons that I have with this shoe. So two cons and little knocks that I have against this shoe is number one, the tongue runs a bit short. Now, I'm curious how other folks are going to perceive this, because what I've noticed is, like, I like to generally wear my shoes a smidge looser, but the problem with the Nano X5 is that it is a 6 eyelet shoe. So you gotta go all the way up on these shoes, I think, to get good security. And then what ends up happening is this tongue just feels a little bit short at times. It doesn't slide around a ton, but I am curious if there's going to be an issue, for example, for lower foot volumes, to where this tongue does start to slide under because it's so short, if that's going to be a problem with the lacing system. So that is something that I could see being an issue for certain foot anatomies in certain populations. For most folks, I don't know if that's going to be an issue, but you can see here, for example, like how the tongue just looks a little bit short regarding the overall collar and heel back here. The boot security is solid, but there is a pretty big opening, that short tongue. It's interesting. I don't know if it's going to necessarily resonate with everybody. The second potential issue that I could see folks having with the shoe down the road, and this is something that I think we're going to need more data and more time on to assess, is at the forefoot here, where we have that chassis system that intersects into the midsole here and the outsole. I'm curious if the durability of the shoe is going to stand up to the test of time. So far for me, it has done a really good job. But I did notice some imperfections with this coming out of the box, that there's just a little bit of paint chipping there and stuff. So it's not the biggest issue in my opinion yet, but it is definitely one of those points on a shoe where if you have a lot of friction, a lot of force, etc., that is something or an area where I could see there being some potential issues. You can see right here too on the upper, like where the stress on the flex weave is starting to come. When it comes to the flexion I'm putting into the toe box, so for my plyos and running and whatnot, you can see where there's a bit of bunching, and that's right at the point in which this all intersects. So all that to say, again, not an issue yet, but definitely something I'm going to be keeping an eye on as I wear these more and as I get more months into testing them. And I would love to hear your thoughts too as you wear yours and break yours in. Keep me posted in the comments below if you notice anything going on with this area of the shoe. But for the most part, the shoe has been a much better shoe compared to the Nano X4, and I haven't had any massively glaring cons in this model yet, besides some quirks that I could see bothering some folks. But now let's talk about the performance of the Nano X5. To break down the performance of the Nano X5, I'll discuss how they do for lifting, cross-training, CrossFit, short runs, and daily wear in the context of lifting. I have thoroughly enjoyed this shoe, and I see them as a really good fit for that recreational lifter who does a little bit of everything. So you hit machines, you hit free weights, all in a single workout. You like to blend strength with hypertrophy, etc. This shoe has been stable enough to support heavier deadlifts over 400 pounds, squats over 300 pounds. So when it comes to midsole density and stability, even though this is a slightly softer and less dense material compared to the prior Nanos, I don't see them as being a massive issue for recreational lifters. Now, if you are obviously squatting north of 500 and whatnot, you may notice a little bit of compression in this shoe, but I think for the vast majority of folks, myself included, this midsole is gonna offer you plenty of stability for your lifting needs. I also like that you have this really grippy split outsole construction. It gives you a little bit more flexibility out of the box for single leg work, so for lunges and split squats, this toe box feels pretty dang good and never feels super limiting or too stiff. The Nano X4 I thought could feel a little bit stiff at times, and because that taper, it just felt a little bit uncomfortable and pinchy. This model hasn't had that issue. You also have a really grippy outsole, so I like the shoe as a whole for general lifting. When it comes to CrossFit and cross training, the shoe has also done a really good job. So far, the durability has been on point. Generally speaking, the FlexWave upper has notoriously stood up pretty well to most abrasion activities. So for example, we have that material on the Nano X1, X2, X3, X4, and it generally does a pretty good job. And with the Rope Pro tech in the shoe, like I have been trying to break this model and like rip this apart, but I have yet to do it. And I think that's a nice sign as to how this is built and how these are glued together and how they're put together. I don't think rope climbing durability is gonna be an issue for most. Now, maybe on certain ropes, if you're so heavy on the feet, maybe, but I have yet to have this issue, and I have tested this on now 3 different ropes, and again, no issues just yet. I will say though, on the newer rope I was climbing on the other day, I was having a little bit of a burning rubber smell, but I was also going pretty high volume with my rope climb, so kind of just like a self 5 to me, I guess, with the volume there, but I have been impressed with this shoe so far. When it comes to stability of the upper, I've also enjoyed this shoe. With this TPU wrap here, it gives you a little bit of lateral support, and that midfoot, in my opinion, has a bit more stability and pop to it too, with the TPU insert here, which we also had in the Nano X3 and X4. The boot itself also has a nice cup too, so I don't think security is gonna be an issue, and if you're doing multi-directional work, this shoe should work. And also, for my folks who are doing like classes like F45 and taking classes at like Nike Studios, this model I think will also be a good bet, giving you a nice, well-rounded range of performance, but then also having a bit more of a bias towards stability. When it comes to short runs, this model has actually kind of surprised me. I figured they were going to run a little bit dense like the prior Nanos, but these have honestly felt pretty good for my running needs. Now, I will say, we don't have a ton of heel beveling here, so if you're a heel striker and you're wanting a shoe for running 1, 2, 3 miles, this might not be your best bet, but if you just have intervals programmed in your WODs, or if you are just somebody like myself who likes to program 400 to 1,000 meter bouts in your workouts and like rotate through them as you're training, this can be a good option, because if you're primarily on your forefoot and midfoot, this midsole I think will feel pretty good, and I don't think it's gonna feel too limiting. So I have enjoyed them for short runs for the most part, and they're a lot better in my opinion than the Nano X3 and Nano X4. When it comes to daily wear, the shoe has also done a pretty good job. They're pretty dang comfortable, and with the reworked upper volume, you do get a bit more room in this shoe. And my only gripe with this model for daily wear is you can't really wear them looser, because with this lower tongue, it can start to move a little bit more. So it is just one of those things to think about with this shoe. If you want that training shoe that you can wear loose and then train in and not have to adjust the laces at all, that might not be this model. So when it comes to the lifting performance of the shoe, I would give them a strong 8.5 out of 10. For cross training and CrossFit, I would also give them an 8.5 out of 10. For short runs, an 8 out of 10. They have surprised me for that. And then for daily wear, I'd give the shoe an 8 out of 10. It is a much more well-rounded shoe compared to the Nano X4, and it fits a lot better too, in my opinion. So when it comes to the price of the Reebok Nano X5, you can expect to pay $140. So we did not see a price hike in this shoe like other training shoes on the market. So that price is consistent with the Nano X3 and Nano X4. Now, is that price point worth it for the shoe? Honestly, so far, I think it is, especially if you have like the last iterations. I think this is going to feel like a stronger, well-rounded shoe for that price point. All right, so now let's answer the question, who should buy the Reebok Nano X5? Number one, if you're a Nano lover, and more specifically really enjoy the Nano X1 and Nano X2, I think you'll like the Nano X5. This model feels very similar, in my opinion, on the feet to the Reebok Nano X2, or at least the most similar to that model. Another context where I think this shoe makes a lot of sense is if you're a generalist just wanting that kind of foolproof shoe for doing a little bit of everything in the shoe, this can be a really great, well-rounded option to go with. It's not super biased in any one activity. And then number three, if you're somebody who likes a light arch support and you do have a slightly wider forefoot, this shoe I think should work really well for your foot anatomy. Now, who should pass on this shoe? Number one, if you are somebody who wants a shoe for maxing out your barbell lifts, you want a slightly lower stack height, or even a denser midsole for lifting purposes, whether that's for catching cleans or sinking massive squats, this may not be your best bet, but again, I think it's gonna work for most folks. And then number two, if you like a flatter feeling shoe, you may not like the arch in the shoe. This model is pretty stereotypical with the newer Nanos regarding giving you some arch support. You will feel that, in my opinion, in this model. So if that is something that irked you with the last few shoes, that would be something to consider. Granted, it's not as aggressive as the Nano X4. So I do think that is a win here for this shoe, but again, flat feet be warned, this model may not resonate with you, especially if you haven't liked the Nano line for the last 3, 4, 5 years. All right, when breaking down the sizing and fit of the Nano X5, size this Nano like you did the Nano X1 or Nano X2, or how you size your shoes in New Balance, Nike, Reebok, etc. This shoe should fit true to size, in my opinion, for most foot anatomy. So as opposed to the Nano X4 that could run a little bit too snug and you might have to size it up a half size, this shoe feels a lot more true. Again, it feels most similar to the Nano X2, which did have a bit more of a bias, I would say, towards slightly wider feet. So for narrow feet, medium width feet, and for wider feet who are hovering that E to double E width range, this shoe should fit true to size. Now, if you have a 3E foot width, you may want to go up a half size, but again, with this lower tongue, something I would be concerned about if this shoe runs too long is the overall security of this model. So if you have questions on sizing before you buy, definitely hit me in the comments below or reach out on Instagram and I could help kind of direct you based off your foot anatomy and what you're currently wearing. So when it comes to the weight, heel toe drop, and insole in the Nano X5, for my size 10 shoe here, we have a weight of about 12.35 ounces. The heel to toe drop of the shoe sits at 7 millimeters, and this model does have a removable thin insole. And if we want to look at the toe spring of this shoe, there is a little bit of toe spring, but again, with the flexible toe, it's actually pretty easy to ground the forefoot in this shoe compared to the Nano X4, which had a little bit more rock to the forefoot. All right, so now let's break down the construction of the Nano X5. Up here on the toe box, you have that extended outsole layer that wraps up. And then looking at the midsole of this shoe, you have that dual response midsole that runs throughout. So as you can see, you can still press into both of these midsoles and they're not super dense, which is why I also like the versatility of the shoe and the fact that Reebok didn't go wicked dense with the material back here in the heel. You also have that outsole wrap on both sides. So you have that Rope Pro wrap here on the midfoot of the medial and lateral side of this shoe. And then looking at the upper of this model, you have the flex weave that runs throughout the forefoot into the midfoot back here. Back here in the heel, you do have an internal heel cup. You have some additional padding, and I've yet to have any friction issues back here with this cup either. Looking at the midfoot and lacing and tongue structure, you have 6 eyelets that go up. You have a tongue here with dual loops, and the tongue does have a gusset, but again, it sits pretty short. So this padded mesh tongue, I think, could be a tiny bit longer when we're nitpicking the overall fit and feel and security of the shoe for every foot anatomy. And then looking at the TPU wrap here, you still have the TPU insert here that goes from the heel into the forefoot. That does give this midfoot a little bit more structure, like you can hear. Like when you're breaking them in, you can kind of hear that like crispiness of that plastic breaking in. Looking at the outsole, you have the split outsole construction that's designed to give you a little bit more flexibility. Now you can see the midsole here through the forefoot tread. So if you are wearing these for daily wear, definitely keep that in mind if it's wet or damp outside. And then once again, this model does have a thin foam removable insole, but if you have additional questions on this shoe, drop a comment down below. All right, so let's answer the final question. Would I get this shoe again? Honestly, I would. This model feels like Reebok is finally getting into its form when it comes to building a well-rounded shoe that's kind of foolproof for a lot of different activities and lifters and athletes, as opposed to the Nano X4, which I think was very polarizing with its fit, and as opposed to the Nano 10 and down, which were very much more biased towards CrossFit and lifting. This shoe, I think, should be that model that kind of does a little bit of everything for most folks. Granted, it's not super CrossFit focused, so if that's something you loved about the Nano line, this model is not necessarily getting exactly back to that niche, but it does a very good job across the board, and I've been impressed with them though so far, and I'm stoked that they made them a little bit more spacious in the forefoot. But if you have additional questions on the Nano X5, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, y'all, drop a like on the video, drop a share on the channel. I will see you guys in the next one.